Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Nick Ishmael Perkins, and welcome to the second webinar in the series Talk Back Better, presented by the International Science Council in partnership with the Falling Walls International Year of Science Engagement Initiative. This series is part of the Public Value of Science program and came about in response to repeated calls by member institutions of the International Science Council to address issues which are challenging effective research communication and evidence-based policymaking, or indeed decision-making. And Talk Back Better is derived from the oft-repeated call during the pandemic and is associated with the ambition to use this unprecedented crisis to transform our society, either to make it more resilient or indeed more equitable. So the panel of experts for the Public Value of Science program identified some key themes that we think are really crucial for organized research to address if we are going to build the capacity for science engagement. This doesn't mean that we're suggesting science communication needs to be confrontational or even focused on verbal communication. But today, the theme is social media and digital communities. But before I get into the substance of discussion, there are just a few bits of housekeeping that I'd like to go through, as it were. First, to remind you that the session is being recorded, and indeed all of the webinars will be recorded and are available subsequently. The session from last week, Thursday, is now available, and my colleagues will be sharing it in the chat so that you can go back if you didn't see it and watch it. We ask you to let us know in the chat where you are joining from around the world. We like to have an idea of the kind of audience that we're reaching. And the structure. So today's webinar is going to be 1 hour and 15 minutes. We're going to start with about 10 minutes of a kind of provocation, which looks at where we're at the moment on this issue. Then we'll have a bit of a flash talk where we have someone who's going to share from their experience, the work that they have done. It's a way basically of showcasing for you what can be done around some of these issues. And then we have a panel discussion, which will reflect on what we've heard and offer some practical tips on what we might do on the way forward. And of course, that's the chance as well to take questions from you as an audience. Now, throughout the session, feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will be referring to them when we start to speak to our panel. Now, the objective of today's session is to explore support for the capacity for digital engagement. We know that the editorial decentralization of various platforms has created space for the amplification of various perspectives on science. And this webinar will explore the reality of most people's engagement with social media. But crucially, we will also look at the concerns in some communities about the impact of algorithms and gatekeeping on the internet. A sophisticated understanding of how social media operates and the way that digital communities can affect our work as researchers appears to be a blind spot for many research communities. This session will talk about why that is and what can be done about this realistically. Let me start by introducing our provocateur, Courtney Radish, who is a journalist, scholar, and free expression advocate who writes and speaks about the nexus of technology, media, and policy, and provides expertise and strategic consulting for organizations around the world. She's the author of Cyber Activism and Citizen Journalism in Egypt, Digital Dissidence and Political Change, and one of the most well-connected people that I know. She also happens to be a member of the panel of experts for the PVS program. Courtney, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm delighted to be here with you today. I am currently a fellow at the the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy, as well as the Center for International Governance in Canada. And hopefully this is now working. Can you see my screen, Nick? Great. All right,
Yes.
so I want to go through and spend the next few minutes talking about our communications environment and what we know about it, because it is a technologically inflected, what I call platformitization of our communications ecosystem. Before we jump in, I'm going to ask you a few questions throughout to keep it as interactive as possible as we can in a Zoom event. So we'll have a couple poll questions that you guys can answer throughout so we can kind of see how people are engaging and responding to some of these issues. And, you know, social media is an amazing opportunity to connect and engage with people about perspectives, but they also create new dynamics that scientists and researchers must contend with or risk being subsumed by, with profound repercussions for the public interest. You know, if you think about the cost of, for example, COVID-19 vaccine misinformation, disinformation, they estimate it costs $50 to $300 million each day. In previous pandemics, like the HIV/AIDS outbreak, misinformation and its effect on policy was estimated to have led to an additional 300,000 deaths in South Africa alone. So I think people are aware of the challenges posed by dis, and malinformation. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. What I want to do is just recognize that what we know today is informed primarily by some major limitations on research, which is that it's primarily done on news and politics. There's relatively little science information. There is more on climate change and health, but outside of that, very little. It's primarily coming out of US and Europe. And it's mostly done about English language information. Now, we all know here today that those are not necessarily covering, issues. Everyone does not speak English. Misinformation is an issue in every language. So I think that is a call for the need for more information. But what we do know, I want to take you through in the next few minutes. First, the logic of the communications in the platform era, the various types of algorithms that shape this information, what the empirical research says about filter bubbles and echo chambers, and what this means for the twin challenges of information abundance and data voids, which are the defining factor of this information ecosystem. And then, of course, we'll get into this discussion about what this means for science and how we communicate it. So before, as we're getting started, I want to just poll you to ask you, do you publish your research or communicate science in a language other than English? And you'll see as we get into the discussion why this is relevant. So, the platformed information economy has a particular logic to it. And, many of you probably publish in closed journals, have access, areas that are limited in terms of public access. And we are not going to get into the challenges of publishing in the kind of scientific arena where we know that issues around hype and hyperbole and positive publication bias, predatory publishing, and other issues are at a factor. But we also have recognized the move towards the importance of open science, open source, websites, informal knowledge like Wikipedia, crowdsourced knowledge, news media engagement in the public sphere. So I see that people have hopefully answered the poll, and I want to ask you to answer another question, which is whether you publish your research in preprint servers or on academic social media networks or other fora like that. And as we get into this discussion, we will see that, a little more than half don't publish in any other language than English. So this will be interesting. As we see in science communication, the platformitization of communication, we see that, the traditional intermediaries are still a factor, but now we have platform intermediaries, okay? We know that that many people around the world use social media for news, especially younger people and those with lower levels of education. Messaging apps like WhatsApp and Telegram have become especially popular in the global South. Those who use social media are more likely to say that they have been exposed to misinformation about coronavirus, for example, than non-users. And we know that Facebook is seen as a main channel for spreading false information almost everywhere. but that messaging apps like WhatsApp, these kind of closed information ecosystems are seen as even a bigger problem in parts of the global South, like Brazil or Indonesia. Online, as you well know, there's very limited differentiation between types of publications, indications of information integrity, whether something is, provided by a scientist or a random person. So one of the other factors that, that kind of shapes this environment is the intermediation of algorithms that are primed for extremism because of their design of social media. And when you couple this with behavioral science that has established how negative narratives resonate and achieve stickiness, we see how these collaborative filtering and ranking algorithms can lead to emotional contagion and cause people to experience the same emotions without even their awareness or alter their behavior to match their new apparent reality, which has profound implications for science. And I'm not going to get into it too much here, but I want to recognize that, online harassment is also a big factor in communication in this environment because women, minorities, and frankly, anyone who's engaging, especially on controversial topics, which some issues in science are likely going to face online harassment, and the dimensions there can lead to silencing. So this is all something we want to think about in terms of when we're communicating what the platform environment entails. So I want to go through a few types of the primary algorithms. So, it's important that we understand how is our communications environment designed. There are really three main types of algorithms: search, recommendation, and ad tech. These are all kind of the search and recommendation are content sharing algorithms that organize and curate our experience. And the ad tech, of course, are the third party, they enable third parties to have a mechanism for directly reaching specific audiences by leveraging data on demographic information and interests of a user. So when we think about search algorithms, there are some key issues around here. This is, Google Scholar is a huge way that the articles are returned, and they are ordered in terms of influence by previous citation counts, but they also include many non-peer-reviewed types of returns. And of course, Google Search is the most popular search engine in the world. But do you know what the second most popular one is? YouTube. So, video is really important. The underlying philosophies of databases differ. Google Scholar attempts to index almost everything, whereas like the Web of Science and Scopus only index papers that have been published in journals that they consider worthy of representation. So this obviously gives us back differing results. Papers written by people in the US, the UK, and China are far more heavily cited than those from other countries are. And if you think about search, it also includes like those autocomplete bars when you search for something. So if you're searching for, what's happening to the night sky with Elon Musk's new endeavor up there, or you're, an astronomist trying to get the latest information, you're going to autocomplete things. And that's a form of search. And that is being driven by relevance, quality, and language. And I mentioned video. Young people are treating YouTube as their primary search engine, and younger audiences empathize better with video. And this is drawn from multinational research. So how many of you, when you are communicating, are doing it in video? How many are you thinking about YouTube as a search engine? So a second type of algorithm is a recommendation algorithm. These are, obviously surface relevant or engaging content automatically. And this is about the personalization recommendations. They are historic and they are predictive, and they can sometimes be explicit. You can choose that you want certain types of information to be recommended, but they can also be implicit. So they're drawing on information about users and their past behaviors based on their attributes, interests, and behaviors. And so this is, trending or popularity algorithms, autoplay and up next algorithms. So this is what is shaping our ability to get out science information. We have to take these algorithms into account when we're thinking about how we communicate and what we communicate. So when we think about what the empirical research says about things like filter bubbles, about echo chambers, I think you've all heard those terms. It's interesting because, first of all, as I said in the beginning, most of this research is drawn from politics and news. There's relatively little information on science, communication, but we can extrapolate. The limited empirical research about the possible existence, size, and drivers of echo chambers in public discussions around science is limited. It is also limited in terms of actual evidence for this. We hear it a lot in our terminology, but in fact, we see that the role for self-selection, elite cues, and small, highly active communities are the most important factors for shaping the communication environment and the spread of disinformation. Elite cues are really important. So if we see elite cues as critical, then that means our communication should aim to reach and communicate with policymakers and influencers, as well as the so-called general public, which is actually very hard to reach. The increasing, prevalence of fake and manipulated multimedia and automatically generated texts creates, new perils for science. And we need to think about how the AI and machine learning techniques that include natural language processing models, neural networks, generative adversarial networks that can learn and improve their functioning means that we need to get good information in multiple languages into these environments. So one of the defining characteristics of this ecosystem is this tension between information abundance and information voids. So abundance means there is so much information out there on some topics like climate change or coronavirus or health information. So the challenge for communicators is to make it through that morass, to get their information through the morass, to look at how search engine and recommendation engine optimization can get that information out, show it higher on results page, improve a piece of content's likelihood of being recommended through autocomplete or up next playlists or collaborative filtering. And there are 4 main steps for this: keyword research, indexing, on-site optimization, and off-site optimization. And this is where the importance of metadata comes in. You have to be thinking about the metadata of the content that you're creating so that expert content creators, the search companies are expecting these content creators to produce metadata and other SEO and REO signals that are structured for search engines to use and recommendation engines to use to show that information. So, if you're just putting up information in a PDF, this is going to make it much harder to find that information and to be indexed than if you're putting it up also as an HTML. So pay attention to metadata and the form that you put it up in, and think about doing that in different ways. The other challenge are information voids. And this is really important for science because this means that there are, when someone searches for something, there are queries that return very few results. And this happens around, say, breaking news, strategic news, outdated terms, fragmented terms, or problematic queries, according to the research. And, scientists need to be aware of this because if you're trying to combat misinformation after it's already out there, it's going to be much more difficult and probably too late. So thinking about how, what does the data situation look like on your topic? You can take active attempts to try to fill that in there. And I want to talk to that sense about Wikipedia as an important outlet for this. This Wikipedia is actually a prime multilingual knowledge source on the web with millions of readers a day. It is also a first stop for readers from less developed countries who are more likely to be motivated by intrinsic learning and to read articles in depth. Science-oriented topics are more prevalent in low and less developing countries, according to a 2019 study. Wikipedia's health content is the most frequently visited resource for health information on the internet, and Wikipedia shows up highly returned in Google results. So a lot of researchers and scientists and people with lots of letters after their name might not be thinking about Wikipedia as a source of where to put their scientific information or their research. But actually, that's a great way to help fill information voids and get your results and your information out through information gluts, because that is where so many people turn to the internet for information. And so I think you want to be thinking about communicating across multiple platforms and language. Going back to that poll that we saw, that about a little more than half of you do it only in English, but there are so many languages that people speak and read online. And one of the challenges is both the actual research in those languages, but also the way that affects AI modeling, from training classifiers and integrity labeling, content moderation and recommendation systems. Language plays a really significant role in those. And so, thinking about the skewed distribution of languages, the systems that undergird the algorithms we discussed earlier, 90% of the world's 7,000 languages used by more than 1 billion people have minimal, if any, support in natural language processing. Languages and countries are not prioritized by major platforms or the AI research community, receive less attention, but that's also an opportunity for scientific information to rise to the top and to help shape how that information and those learning systems are designed. So, just to conclude, there are several important indications that this gives us for how we should govern internet and what type of regulatory environment we need to enable better use of these platforms, including access to data and greater transparency in these AI systems for online platforms. And as we conclude, one thing to think about that we could learn from the news industry is whether we should request and demand that platforms do a better job of surfacing good information from science and labeling that type of science. So, before we wrap up, if we can get at the last poll of whether you think social media companies should do more to promote trustworthy science information, I think that will give us an interesting way to start the discussion. So with that, understanding a bit about the forces that shape our information environment and how we need to think about taking advantage of those or mitigating against them, I want to turn it back over to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I am wondering if we can see the results from that last question, because it would be really helpful to feed this in to the okay, we have the results here. Yes, I know we actually didn't, because I saw somebody's asking actually about poll question 2, but we've gone to poll question 3 because we made a little adaptation there, but this is actually fascinating. I think Courtney's definitely something for us to pick up during the panel discussion in a few minutes. Thank you, Courtney, for that. I think what you've done very nicely is to articulate a phenomenon, as you describe it, a platformitization of communication, which is an experience I think all of us can relate to. If you spent any time online in the last sort of 5 years, what you were describing makes a lot of sense. But I also was heartened to see there were a number of really concrete recommendations that you made about negotiating this space, like elite cues and the value of these, thinking about them, the value of video, thinking about metadata, and Wikipedia, and also this issue of language diversification, all very helpful in providing some profile and thinking about how you can be sure that your research might be engaging in the right kind of place and getting some profile. Okay, I want to now invite Darrion Nguyen, who is going to do a bit of a flash talk for us. And Darrion is the talent behind Lab Shenanigans. He describes himself as a science influencer and draws on his background in theatre and biochemistry. In fact, we were saying that across the panel today, we have actually 3 theatre degrees. So it's an interesting confluence, I have to say, not one that we would have anticipated. But he also has a degree in biochemistry, and he uses this combination of talents and competencies to create relatable and educational science content for diverse audiences. And indeed, this content has raked up over 15 million likes across TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. He is known as the Bill Nye of millennials. And over to you.
Oh gosh. Thank you for the amazing introduction. Holy cow. So as Nick mentioned, my name is Darrion Nguyen. I make a lot of science content on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and I kind of started all this by accident 3 years ago when I was working as a research technician. I had no intentions on making science videos. It was just, let me just make this video, post it online, and people started liking some of the, I guess, educational bits that I was doing. And I was like, okay, this is my thing. I'm gonna do it. And people have just been eating it up. And so I have just been going at it. And I think this form of science communication is definitely unconventional, but I think, as more different social media platforms roll out, people will begin trying to go down this avenue. It's also an avenue that I'm wanting to further explore. So I like to describe each social media platform as like its own ecosystem. And depending on who your target audience is, you kind of have to learn how to abide by the rules of each platform and see how you fit in that ecosystem. And my favorite platforms are Instagram and TikTok. And I don't have enough time to talk about both platforms, but I will talk mostly about TikTok. And it's hard to explain the culture of TikTok without really being on it, but I will try my best. So for those that are not on TikTok, it's a social media platform where you can upload videos. But what makes this platform so interesting is that everyone is kind of like in on the inside jokes of the trends of that platform. And there are a lot of different trends like dancing and lip syncing to audios and using the words of those audios to a relatable situation or scenario. And there's also like different sectors or I guess different niches in TikTok. And like your news feed will often be tailored to your interests. That's just how the algorithm picks up on the videos that you like. So for example, my For You page or my news feed are just videos of like science videos and also like illustration videos and dumb humor videos. And that's just the type of stuff that I like. And another thing that I really like about TikTok is that compared to other social media platforms, TikTok kind of like takes down this wall of professionalism and you get to see real, authentic and raw personalities. When you see like a very interesting video on like YouTube, the creator will spend a lot of time editing it. The cinematography, the videography is really, really good. A lot of, I guess, like text and memes and stuff. And TikTok is just, it could just be a person vlogging with a phone, coming out of bed, or just waking up from bed and saying something funny. And that video can go viral. And it could be as short as like 4 seconds long. And so, I think I was really, really captured by that type of, I guess, culture. So I definitely hopped on and wanted to try to include some science content with it. And the algorithm on TikTok is really nice because everyone has an equal opportunity to have a quote unquote like viral video. And in the same vein, all videos have equal opportunity to reach a larger audience. And so that overcomes that common problem within the science community where, every time we're trying to throw out science content, we're just throwing out science content to other scientists, researchers, people in the community. But on TikTok, if you post a video, you are sending it to like random people around the world. And if they like that video, it goes on to the next step and it's reaching more audience. And so it's easy to spread a video on TikTok. And so some of the different trends on TikTok, as I mentioned, involves like dancing and movements. And what I like to do specifically is using a popular audio and transcribing the words of that audio. So like, let's say one of my first videos I made was using an audio clip from Dance Moms, and I wrote down like the script of that audio, and I try to find specific keywords in that audio and try to relate it to a biochemical or biology type of content and try to personify different molecules in a mechanism. And so it's using what TikTok is already providing, like the trends, and trying to flip it on its head and sprinkle some science content. And surprisingly, people love that type of content. I just kept doing it. So I think right now on TikTok, there's definitely a push for more educational type of content. People are wanting to learn more, and also people are wanting to teach more. And it's amazing because there's a sense of camaraderie in the comment section. So if there is some type of misinformation either in the video or in the comment, people are quick to jump in the comments and try to correct them. And by correcting them, that also brings the engagement up. People are allowed, that video spreads even more. And I think it just helps us, try to create a discussion around that topic. And so if anyone is wanting to become a science communicator, I encourage you to use TikTok. I know it can be very daunting, but TikTok provides a lot of different tools that you can use. And also they make video creation super easy. Discovery Channel, for example, on TikTok, they use some of the videos from their show. They use a pop culture audio, and then they just slap a caption on it, and that video will go viral with like 1 million likes. And so it's super easy to have a quote unquote viral video, but also it's also easy to spread information. So I think the important thing about TikTok is don't take yourself too seriously, be authentic and have fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrion. That was it was actually really interesting. I'm struck by a few things that you talked about, the issue of each platform having their own ecosystem, this notion about the democratization of distribution, which I think is extremely important for us to be aware of, and also has direct implications for what Courtney was talking about before around how we negotiate data voids and information abundance and so on, and the appetite for this kind of content. I want to actually share a quick anecdote from the UK, because I think there's a little bit of a notion that, but it's not really for an audience that actually doesn't have much impact on policy and so on. But there is, very recently in the UK, there was an example of government policy being dictated by a footballer who was very popular actually on these platforms. And it was around basically school meals for kids, actually, because the government was going to stop it. And actually his campaign became so overwhelmingly popular that actually they had to perform a U-turn. So I just want to use that as an example of actually the importance of this kind of engagement, because, we think, of course, as well about, this audience and who in turn they might be able to influence and who's listening to them. Thank you, Darrion. That was really, really useful. Thank you for sharing your experience. I see that folks are making lots of comments. Thank you for letting us know where you're joining us from. And do continue to post your questions in the chat, in the Q&A. We'll come back to them in a second. Now, what I would like to do is actually have a bit of a conversation with two of our guests. Dr. Iris Isip-Tan is professor at the University of the Philippines College of Medicine. She's also chief at the University of the Philippines Medical Informatics Unit and director at the University of the Philippines Middle Interactive Learning Center. Her research interests include mobile health, consumer health, informatics, and telehealth. And she's actually currently doing a PhD focused on social media misinformation, disinformation in public health. Thank you for joining us, Iris. And also big welcome to Yvette D'entremont, who is an American writer and chemist. Her SciBabe blog was launched in 2014 as a slide project to debunk common misconceptions about diet and agriculture, and it's become a full-time job. She's been on the cover of LA Times magazine and features in mainstream media regularly, but I don't want to call her a media sensation because she says I always try to big her up. She also happens to be a member of the panel of experts on the Public Value of Science program. Thank you, Yvette, for joining. To get us started, actually, Courtney, I want to come back to the results from that poll, where overwhelmingly we saw the audience say that they feel we should be engaging more with tech platforms. And I'm going to ask actually each of you for your thoughts on this. So Courtney, do you want to take a second and tell us what you thought about this?
Sure. So I'm glad. I would think that makes a lot of sense to see that level of interest. And my research and my work is in the press freedom community and the impact of digital policy on media, especially in the global South. And we actually have structures now set up with the platforms to discuss the impact of their policies and algorithms on the news media and on news integrity. And what we've seen is that they've rolled out things like labels. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they demonetized those accounts. They've prevented state media, Russian state media accounts from, amplifying or being on the platforms. So we've seen that they've taken seriously that sort of information. And we saw during COVID that they decided to prioritize certain information from certain institutions like the World Health Organization. So it got me thinking, like, why don't we do this for science information when that's really important to signal what is good information, or at least the types of bodies or organizations, entities, and individuals that have that level of integrity, and that can be done through labels. It can be done through indicators. There's the verified label. There's the these other things that can then send signals to the algorithms that, hey, this is an account to amplify, or there's a lot of stuff happening here. So this algorithm should maybe, if someone's trying to say get that account taken down, which happens a lot with communicators who are trying to combat misinformation, maybe that could lead to more protection. So I think there's a lot to be done here, and I'm very interested in talking to the platforms about what more they can be doing to protect scientific information and integrity.
Thanks, Courtney. Iris, do you have any reflections?
I would agree, because when I attended the World Health Organization training for infodemic management, they showed us the type of collaborations that they were doing with Facebook, and how if you search for something COVID-19 related, you would be directed to the COVID-19 Information Center. I do have a Facebook page that I run as an endocrinologist, and it's 10 years old. But the moment I started posting not about diabetes, but about COVID-19, I also saw those labels from the Facebook platform that this post is discussing COVID-19 and you should go to the COVID-19 Information Center. So that was something that they did. And yeah, I agree that that would be a nice thing to have also for science communication in general.
I mean, do you think, I see Yvette is going to come in a second, but I want to ask you, do you think that, because this doesn't feel like a very mature partnership. Is that because of a lack of awareness on the part of researchers? Is it because of a wariness? Yeah.
That's a very good question. I have been telling my colleagues in the Philippines to get on social media for several years now. And the way I tell them is that we need to establish our personal learning networks on the social media platforms. But there's a general distrust and wariness. And for us doctors, for example, they worry about keeping to the online medical professionalism and how that might affect their reputation. And so they're afraid to actually go online, for example, and do some debunking. When I started my Facebook page, for example, I was asked, what's the return on investment? Why are you doing this? And these are questions that still remain, though during the pandemic, a lot more of the physicians, at least in the Philippines, went online because of the quarantine restrictions, and there was no other way to get the information out, for example, to our patients. But yeah, there is awareness still, and every time I give a talk about, being active on Twitter, being active on Facebook, they also tell me, when do you find the time for this? Lately, I've told the university, maybe we should include social media academic portfolios as part of tenure and promotion. Then maybe we should get more traction from the other academics if that is on the plate.
I think this is a really important point you've raised there at the end, and I want us to come back to discussing that a bit more. But I'm going to go to Yvette now. And Yvette, welcome.
Thank you for having me. And you raised 2 points, Iris, that I'm glad you that you hit on. One, the algorithms on Facebook directing you to this little block saying, hey, there's COVID information here. Here's Facebook telling you the COVID information that you might have missed. This, I don't think, helps with trust in the platform, because I think they're trying to get you to, Facebook's like, here, we've got good info for you. And I don't think anybody really trusts Facebook right now. And even if Facebook is working with people like with Courtney and people who are trying to do the good things, I've seen too many times Facebook putting that little block on people like us who are trying to put out accurate, well-researched information, and letting the people, the 12 some odd accounts that are responsible for 90% of the false vaccine information, just letting those slide. So in order for us to get to a point where we feel like we can work with those algorithms, I think that there needs to be more trust between us and Facebook, and more trust between the public and Facebook. And I don't know if we're there yet. And I also feel like we have to be able to trust that Facebook will put scientific accuracy in front of, 2 cents more of profit per share for their shareholders. And I don't know how we can guarantee that, and that's a big obstacle that's in front of us. So those are a couple of heavy points that we have to contend with.
Sure. So just actually, I think this is really interesting, Yvette. So are you suggesting that it's the business model that Facebook has that's the big obstacle to building trust in and around the platform?
I wish that wasn't what I was suggesting, but it is absolutely the case. Like, I have a close girlfriend who used to be the managing editor at Snopes, and when they were first working to try to get some fact checking in and get some Snopes fact checking, she ended up leaving Snopes because she was so disillusioned by how bad it was. And I sincerely hope that's changed. I hope that I know that Courtney is getting in and doing some work with them, and I hope Courtney sees better. I hope that it's improved, but just what we've seen the last few years with misinformation finding a breeding ground there. I want to see better before I can say, oh, there's a way for us to navigate around this. Because I don't think we can navigate around it as science communicators, as people who are just trying to look for information better. Like, we can't expect the public to find us better until Facebook does a little bit better with how they manage their algorithms. Like, we can only do so much. It needs to come, we're talking about platforms being our friends. It has to come a bit down from the top more. Like, it's talking back better needs to come from all parts.
Nick, can I just add to that? I mean, I don't think we can trust Facebook. And I think that this is the point where we need regulators to step in. This is not going to happen if we do not regulate, A, the Facebook business model, and B, hold them more responsible for the harm that their platforms cause. And that's a whole nother debate on internet governance and Section 230 that I don't want to necessarily delve into here, because I think that's a different issue. But I think that there are right now regulatory proposals to require that Facebook and other very large platforms share data with researchers and provide a mechanism for independent access to that, so that we can better understand these information environments, along with several other factors. But I think the main point I would take away is you cannot trust the platforms, and therefore that is why we need regulation. But I know that's not the focus for today. So
I mean, it is interesting. Sorry, Yvette, I just want to kind of follow up on this, because you say, actually, Courtney, that it's a different issue. And I understand, because of course the substance of that conversation is quite a big thing. But should we, in organized research, be more invested in that discussion?
Yes, I think we need to partner with the groups like the journalism industry, who has done a much better job of putting that on the agenda, getting in front of lawmakers, demanding open access. I think the social science networks are a bit more advanced on that because they're doing the research into, how platforms affect information. But I absolutely think we should be doing more across the scientific community.
I mean, but even in social science, I don't know that I haven't come across any structural partnerships that are focused on this issue around internet governance. I'd be, I stand open to correction, but I haven't.
Find them and make them our friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I want to move on to.
But...
Yeah, no, but I hear what you're saying. And I would suggest that based on the response to that last poll, that most people do agree. I want to move on though to something that Iris mentioned, earlier. We have here a comment and a question from Siddharth. Thank you, Siddharth. There is a fundamental difference between the incentive structures of social media versus science, where the former prioritizes emotions, controversy, and likes over the fact and accuracy. How can science communicators build on this difference and use stronger emotional engagement to help connect people with science? And I'm going to start with you, Iris, because you started to take us there a bit.
Okay, so when I started my Facebook page in 2012, I was posting about information about endocrine disorders like diabetes, and I was posting in Filipino because I felt that there was not enough material in our own language. And that sort of started it. And at one point, I went viral with a post that garnered about 5 million views. But after that, as we can see, we have other platforms that are now more inviting, like TikTok, perhaps, or on IG. And I'm not there. I'm only on Facebook. And I tend to exude, a different vibe because I'm very serious. I'm a doctor. The most that I would actually be entertaining in a way would be that I call myself an endocrine witch, which always sparks off a conversation. But other than that, I'm pretty serious. So it's really hard to get into that. Now, my current dissertation is actually looking at the posts that I have had for the past 10 years on that Facebook page and trying to see the features of the post that actually make them more engaging. And to that, I've had to, for example, download all, like how many likes and shares, etc. But I'm also trying to do some social network analysis on the data. And then I'm learning how to do autoethnography. I'm not a qualitative researcher. My background is quantitative, but now I'm learning to do an autoethnography, if only to surface how do you moderate a Facebook page, being a physician. And these people who are on the page are not even your patients. You don't know who they are. And they're asking all these questions. What are the boundaries? So it's really hard. Do you become more emotional, as you say? So they'll keep on coming back. But then how do you make sure the material is always fresh and always true or accurate?
So I have many questions, not the least of which is why you call yourself a witch, but I will save that for the moment because that did provoke a little bit of a discussion in our comms team as well. But do you have any emergent findings from your research so far?
So other organizations, I have been trying to get them, for example, other medical societies, I've been trying to get them to open a Facebook page, but they have not been doing as well as I have been. And I think the secret sauce is because I actually put a face on my page. So it's not, for example, like the Society of Endocrinology. It's Dr. Witch who's on the Facebook page. And I think that people appreciate that there is a face that they can connect to. It's an actual person. When I started the page 10 years ago, I only put endocrine witch. I didn't put my name on it. And then I started getting questions. How am I sure you're really a doctor? And then, there are very few endocrinologists in the Philippines. So some of the people on the page would ask their endocrinologists, do you know this endocrine witch? So I had to surface my name. But I think that's one thing that I would say is the difference.
Okay. As you're responding, I'm reminded of a line of discussion from last week's webinar, which focused on misconceptions about audiences. And one of the points that was made, I think, really very compellingly by Jenny Metcalf was that we tend to think when we're communicating or engaging with science that really what people need are facts. But actually, people's perceptions, their decision making is shaped by facts as well as emotional engagement, as well as values, because of course we have social identities, and those identities are tied up with a whole interconnection of things, and that we really need to be aware of this. Yvette, I'm going to turn to you because I know that this touches on conversations that we've had before about engaging people with science, and you have a lot of experience around that. Do you have any reflections on this?
Yeah, and the question's kind of phrased as an either or, where the incentive structures of social media versus science, where one prioritizes emotion and controversy and likes over facts and accuracy. And I don't see there being a dichotomy like that, because in order to get people to click on my facts and my accuracy that I have researched down to the letter, so there's no it's watertight, the facts and the science and the accuracy, I'm going to tell you so many dick jokes. I'm going to tell you so many things that are going to make you laugh, that are going to make your emotions and the funny, and because like science is history, science is story, science is what moves us from human suffering to human enlightenment and the betterment of everything that we're doing. And how is that not emotional? And how is that not a story and something that's going to make you click and go, oh man, this made society better and moved us forward. So if you're telling a good story, if you're diving in and finding out why that science happened, what the things were that held the scientists back in there, what the people story, and to me, science is always a human story. Science is always a history story. You'll find the things that are going to make people click without straying an inch, a centimeter from the facts. Not it's for my American audiences, inches are larger than centimeters. It's to my fellow Americans. Just wanted to make sure y'all know. Anyways, but just to be clear, you don't have to sacrifice facts to get people to show up and read some really amazing science and tell that story compellingly, ever.
Okay, I have two quick follow-up questions for you. They were directed to Darrion, but I think actually it would be equally appropriate for you to respond to them, because as somebody who actually is very prolific with generating social media content, I think it would be interesting to get your take on this. The first one is what's your approach and process to selecting a science topic, right?
Oh, gotcha. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and by extension, actually, are they things that you might avoid or things that you're particularly drawn to? And then the second question really is how you do your own verification and cross-checking.
Let's see. So how I approach selecting a topic, it's really simple. The ADHD brain in me just goes, what makes the dopamine ping? And eventually, if something makes my brain light up, if I can go through from word one to word the last, and every last thing makes my brain light up, and I can make a story that I can read, because I have to sit there and read these things out loud a few times, because even though I'm not, they're articles, not scripts. From my theater, as you mentioned, we have 3 theater people, also have a theater degree. If I can read this thing out loud as a script several times, I know it's going to make for a compelling story that's going to bounce off the page. But this kind of happens to me several times during the day. As I'll start off the day and I'm like, oh, I have a topic that's going to be great. I'll get 2 paragraphs in, I'm like, I don't think this is so great. So I just have to find something that I know is going to make me want to read it, and then I'm like, this will probably be something my audience wants. If I'm just psyched to reread it 3 times, then I think my audience will be. But I try to find something that's an adorable animal, or wait, am I allowed to swear here? I don't want to, I find someone who who I find just an absolutely berserk scientist, or a story of when everything went absolutely, just a crazy science story of a chemical that destroyed a bit of the earth to kingdom coming back, or that kind of something that, is going to make people go, science did that? And that's how I find them. And how as the second follow-up, how I cross-check and verify sources. I will not put something in print. I go to Wikipedia first, which is, back to, as Courtney was saying, great reference. I almost always start at the Wikipedia articles for the 17 things I need to fact check for it. But then I go to Wikipedia's source articles and I try to verify both from Wikipedia's source article, and I go to I try to find a primary source, that can verify Wikipedia's source article. So I try to get at least two, a primary source and something else that will back that up. So always go to, don't just get Wikipedia, get Wikipedia source articles to see if you can find it. And if I cannot find a primary source, I just leave it out or I talk about something else, because there's so much to talk about in any of these really amazing stories that if you cannot verify a fact, find something else. So.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's very sound advice. Courtney, there's a question here for you. Do you think that academic scientific publications like Jstor and Rutledge will have to evolve to compete with free open source mass dissemination platforms like Wikipedia?
I definitely think there's pressure to do that. I mean, I think it's really problematic for the disinformation environment, but also for global inequalities to put much of our scientific knowledge and verified, rigorously researched knowledge behind very expensive paywalls. I do a lot of work with scholars and media in the so-called global South, and a lot of them can't access it. They can't publish there because they can't see what the articles are supposed to look like. And I think that's really problematic because we want better information out there, but we've put it behind paywalls. So there is this trend for open science. UNESCO has an initiative around that. I think though as I was preparing for this, there has been research into the kind of dangers of predatory journals and the need to continue to understand these integrity markers even in academic journals. But I do think that curation is useful. Like Jstor curates peer-reviewed articles, which is useful to have that. So we're not having to rely on Facebook, which does not, or Google Scholar, which is, much more open. So yeah, I do think that there is a movement towards that.
Iris, I saw you sort of nodding vigorously. Do you have something you want to add on this particular topic?
No, because we have problems with access because I'm from the Philippines. So most of us cannot afford really to go behind those paywalls and access those articles. So that's why I was nodding myself. What we do, in fact, I have a publication where we looked at can you decide on a medical case, for example, just reading the abstract of an article versus having access to the full text? And I think that's an article that would not have been written elsewhere because that was our situation. We could only read the abstracts and try to, base off our medical decisions on that.
Okay. That is really scary, but also, there are now academia.edu and ResearchGate and some of these others, which are kind of in between. I mean, it's self-publishing, but I think, looking towards that sort of thing. But, the other danger in this environment is you've got journalists who are looking for the cool story or the latest hot, scientific advance. And there's, tendency to look at things before they've gone through the publishing process, before they've been peer reviewed, and report them as these amazing scientific advantages or advances, which can then, fuel some of this, these problematic dynamics around disinformation. So I think we have to be careful about that, but I would still rather have that information out there so that, if you are reporting on the latest 12-person study that has yet to be published, maybe it'll, those search engines, those academic paper search engines will recommend you other things that any good journalist will deep dive into the links and ideally read the things themselves.
Okay, I want to spend the next sort of 15 minutes talking now about some ways forward, because the truth is, of course, for many academics, this could feel a bit overwhelming. It's oh my goodness, each platform has its own ecosystem, and then there's all this stuff you need to do, metadata through to curation of platforms and algorithms and so on. So let's talk about, okay, how do we start to make sense of this? Right. And there's some questions here, which I think are quite helpful for us to already start engaging with. So one question, which was submitted anonymously, talks about actually misinformation bubbles. And I presume we could extend this actually, Courtney, to disinformation and that kind of thing. What are ways that content creators can break into these bubbles? Or could the prevention of bubbles be the responsibility of social media companies? Who wants to take that one? Courtney, I see you're about to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Yvette kind of alluded to this. There are studies that show in specific, like highly politicized areas like COVID information, that there are a handful of super spreaders. So is the responsibility of the platforms to address that. And again, if we can go to things like what sort of signals of integrity can be offered into certain accounts, or types of accounts, so that the algorithms that surface content or not can do a better job of surfacing, and content that has some level of integrity, I think that would be helpful. But to the point, to the question is, you do need to invest in the time of getting the quality information out there and available. And so thinking about, of course, you're going to have to choose where you're going to put your energy, as a communicator, as a researcher. It's really hard if you can't do TikTok and Wikipedia and Twitter and the ResearchGate and all of that. So like, have a plan. And I would say probably focus on a couple of things, but I think we should be doing way more on Wikipedia, because it is such a primary place that people turn to. I mean, as Yvette just said, like most university students, like, that might be helpful. And they have this community approach that is not profit-based, that is not based on, personalized advertising. It is a community-driven platform. And I think thinking about that and where you invest, that could be helpful.
I mean, it's interesting because apparently the UK government's white paper on leveling up, they call it leveling up, which is actually about kind of community development in rural areas. Large swathes of it were lifted from Wikipedia.
Did people copy and paste it to Wikipedia?
No, from Wikipedia into that white paper. Yvette, yes.
Something going back to something that Iris mentioned. Hold on a quick second. I'm having my brain's having a quick bull moment. Speaking of these misinformation bubbles, give me a quick. Sorry, my brain's futzing out on me.
You were talking, because actually, I think this was when Courtney was talking about the misinformation bubbles, and you.
Here was this is a good thing, because her employer was saying, "Is there a good ROI on doing this?" And it's like, yes, because if we have somebody from these departments working on this, going, what's the way that this is affecting our research? And there are a bunch of different ways that social media platforms can address this. There are a bunch of different ways that people outside of our control can work on this, and we need to work with them. Yes, those are part of this. But we have people within our own ranks that are hurting, that are holding us back too. And one way to work on the misinformation bubbles is try to say, yes, there is an ROI on pushing back on this. And Iris is, we're all working on this, and her saying, yes, we have to, we're going to push back on this. And yes, there is a huge return on investment that we are going to keep on busting these bubbles a little bit by putting more information out. But back to the point of how much of the responsibility is of social media companies. Like there can be a blowback effect when a social media company puts out that little bubble saying, oh, this has been fact checked by our fact checkers, to say, if they go back and say that, the 12 people that are putting out all these misinformation, like the people that are there for the misinformation, that are like, yes, I want the bad vaccine information, they might not listen to it. It's the people that are going to get lured in by it, the ones that aren't sure what to think, they might benefit from it, but it's not, it's like, how do we get social media companies to get that information out in a way that's going to be effective? And that's still they need to work with us a little bit more in an effective manner, and they have to be willing to lose 2 cents per share of profit. That's what it comes down to. It's and that means I don't know how you get Zuckerberg to say no to money.
I mean, I think also I was struck by the data that Courtney shared at the beginning of her talk about the 50 million and the 300,000 deaths in South Africa, because actually it's really interesting to see people starting to quantify that, and I think this is something, again, speaking to your issue around the return on investment, Iris, I'm hoping that will start into the discourse a lot more. Now, I want to, again, sticking with kind of practical tools moving forward, Jessica, has put a question in that I think will resonate with lots of people. And I was at a meeting just yesterday where this issue came up. Some comments on science on social media can be very aggressive and lead to online abuse. How can we protect ourselves from this backlash when talking about science on social media? Does anybody want to take that?
I will jump in on that because again, I think this is where we can learn from the journalism community. One of the co-founders of the Coalition Against Online Violence, which is more than 30 organizations that support journalists, particularly women journalists, because they feel they experience so much online harassment. So I think we have to look at this in 3 dimensions. One is, what can you as an individual do? There are lots of guides in the journalism community. Use that. They apply to everyone. Make sure you use 2-factor authentication to lock down your account so that you can't just log in with one password, because then that makes it easy to take over your account or to hack it. Do your social media hygiene. Check what information is about you online. And if you're finding a lot of personal or contact information, think about how you might be able to clean that up so that you're aware of what's out there. Make sure that, so there's things you can do, but then there are also things that the platforms need to do. We cannot put all of this on the individual. So one of the things is you can have that we have worked with the platforms, especially Facebook now has like a whole safety center. Twitter has new things where you can mute people and block people without necessarily them knowing. So, make sure that you're aware of what the latest tools on the various platforms that you use are, before you start using them. Try to separate out your individual, like your personal social media from your professional social media so that those 2 things are separate. Use one platform for one thing and another, use different names or whatever it is, keep those identities separate. And then, look at what is being done by the journalism community. And we should have the same thing happening in science where, they need to know how scientists and researchers are facing this type of online abuse and come up with real policies to protect them. And again, this is a place where we can join forces with a broader community.
Thank you. That was, I think, a really very helpful and response. And I think the links to what's going on in the journalism community really extends to a lot of areas around the current crisis in science, around everything from accreditation through to dealing with hostile constituencies. I really am very keen on more work being done around this area. I want to move on now, though, to a question from Stephen Hartman. And again, this is a question that I've heard many times before, and I feel will resonate with lots of people. Some research environments may not have the budget resources to have full-time SciComm staff, but depend on researchers, faculty, and support staff to address public science communication via website updates, etc. And yet none of these activities may be the primary work duties of these employees. What advice would the panel have for such environments when it comes to the prioritization of communication activities? Basically, what Stephen is saying is, how do we do this? It's a lot of stuff, and many of us are in environments where we don't have enough time or resources to do all of this. What's your advice from the panel, Yvette?
If you have a smaller organization that's like, hey, we want to engage with the public, we have a few things we want to put out a week, a month. I know this might sound like here's a basic bit of work with a consultant to try to either have something to go out like a newsletter every so often, or to have someone on your staff get up to being able to run a basic bit of Twitter. I know this sounds like just the most basic bit of advice, but here's the thing: if you're SciComm, you need if you have messages you want to get out to the public and you want them to be to get out there in a way that the messaging isn't bungled, talk to an expert. Don't just say, it's okay, we can put out the tweet, it's going to be fine. Like, don't put it off entirely. You also don't need to hire an entire person. But that person who decided this is going to be a part of their duties, maybe 1 or 2 hours a week, invest in making them good at that. Send them to a boot camp, or hire out the 2 hours a week to someone who's an expert. But don't say the SciComm, we can just, they can put words on paper, they can write. Find a person on staff who that will be part of their job, and make sure it's a part of it. Or either that or hire it out. But it can't be it can't be let to drop entirely. It's important to the health of the organization. That's at least my thoughts on it. Just make sure that they're, give them the resources to succeed, whether or not it's in-house or out of house.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Iris, did you want to add anything?
We've had some success with trainees, like our residents and fellows who are in the academic hospital, actually coming out with their own visual abstracts for their researches. And then instead of tweeting out those individual researches through their own accounts, they can be posted by the hospital account. So that actually accounts for some of the content, because people are always looking for content to post on the website or on their social media. We do have some organizations that have, for example, had contests or competitions for visual abstracts and graphics for research. And that has also gotten some traction. So when the contest comes out, we would have immediately 50 or 60 visual abstracts that we could put out. So that's one thing that I can share.
Can I just jump in on that? Because I think that's a great idea. Visuals do really well on social media. But I think also, if you can do the most amazing science effort, you can figure out that wind turbines are going to save climate change. If people do not know about it and they don't believe it, it is going to be useless. So we have to see the link between communication and scientific advance. I think if you're going to, shift this dynamic internally.
Yeah, I think actually, although to be fair to Stephen, I think part of it is actually about being able to articulate the rationale, but part of it seems to be about also being able to prioritize these activities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that I would suggest, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think, that's quite dependent on the particular bit of research, right? Because in fact, what happens is that you then need to think about, okay, who is the most strategic segment of a community to engage with this for it to have traction. And that's probably a bit of analysis that depends on a particular piece of research, that kind of to be able to prioritize, this is the thing this is the effort, the point of entry that's going to be most strategic, would be my thoughts. I don't know if you all have any reflections on that.
I think also thinking about journalists as a primary audience, because so much of science communication is translated by the press, and making sure that you write a good press release, ideally with some sort of story, and I saw, as I was preparing for this, a piece of research that showed that better press releases get better coverage. Not surprising. A lot of journalists are overworked and underpaid. So you write a really nice press release that might just get published as is. And then that helps get your information out, and that will shape the story. I mean, I think there's some value in direct communication, but if you are pressed for time and thinking about how to prioritize, personally, I would do, a really good press release to communicate with the press, and then stick that reference and use some of that on Wikipedia.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are actually running out of time. There was another question that came in, which I'm very interested in, but I suspect we're not going to have time for that, about the user upvotes and comments as a way of establishing the credibility of science news on these platforms. And I can see you guys nodding. Yes, there's space in there to think about that as an activity. However, hopefully this is not the last time we're going to be discussing this topic in the context of the Public Value of Science program. We will be coming back to this because it has so much resonance, and it is, as we have seen, so fundamental to the ecosystem that we operate in as scientists and researchers across disciplines. Thank you very much, actually, to the panel for this conversation, for the analysis, the updates on where the body of knowledge and practice is at, and also for some practical tips. There will be a recording of the session that will be available over the next few days, and we encourage you to join us next week, Thursday, at the same time, where we'll be talking about lessons learned from climate communication. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And of course, special thanks to colleagues behind the scenes at the ISC for hosting us technically. Thank you.